Caged like a zombie, stuffed in a brandy barrel, or buried with a winning hand to cheat the devil, people have been getting really creative with their tombs. Some are creepy, some are sweet, and others will stay with you long after they should. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 of the strangest tombs in the world. Now let's get to raiding. It's a Tomb Raider joke. Sorry. Buried alive? Not on Dr. Smith's watch. This 19th century physician was so terrified of premature burial that he rigged his own grave with a breathing tube, a bell in his hand, and even a 14-inch glass window at the surface pointed directly at his face. The latter, of course, so that people could take a look at his face just to check that he hadn't been buried alive. He died on Halloween in 1893, because of course he did, and he was reportedly buried without incident. In spite of the fact that it's been over 100 years since then, curious visitors can still see the small window above his head. The window might be fogged up, but well, at least you know where to look. The same can't be said for Josie Arlington, whose old mausoleum still stands in New Orleans' Metairie Cemetery. Back in her heyday, Josie was one of the city's most prominent madams, and at first glance her tomb looks almost poetic, until you hear about what happened after her death in 1914. People started claiming to see a glowing red light inside the mausoleum, like it was burning from the inside. Some said it was supernatural payback for her past. Others chalked it up to nearby street lamps reflecting off the polished stone. Then came the ghost stories. A local myth claimed that the bronze statue on her tomb vanished whenever a girl with a bouquet was seen wandering the grounds. Josie's body was eventually moved, but the tomb stayed put, and so did the stories. So much so that it's still one of the most talked about spots in the whole cemetery. But for something a little more heartbreaking than haunted, we head to Mississippi. When 10-year-old Florence Ford died of yellow fever in 1871, her grieving mother took an extraordinary step to keep comforting her. Knowing that Florence had always been terrified of thunderstorms, she had an underground chamber built at her daughter's grave, complete with a glass window and a staircase that led down behind the tombstone. Whenever a storm rolled in, Mrs. Ford would open up the trapdoor, climb down the stairs, and sit near her daughter, separated only by the glass. The little chamber is there to this day. You can even walk down the same steps and try to picture it. A mother sitting through the storm just to be close to her child. Meanwhile, over in Oregon, someone else made sure their legacy came with a bit more of a triple word score. Paul Jonah Lind was a die-hard Scrabble fan, and when he passed away in 2014, his family made sure his grave said so. His headstone in Portland's Lone Fir Cemetery is laid out like a full Scrabble board, complete with lettered tiles spelling out personal messages and high-scoring words. It was vandalized not long after it went up, and some of the tiles were stolen, but the local Scrabble community rallied and restored it, this time with bronze tiles to keep it safe for good. Now, while Paul's is protected by clever craftsmanship, other people have taken a much more industrial approach. Scattered across old British cemeteries, especially in Scotland, you'll find rusted iron cages clamped over certain plots. Known as mortsafes, these grim-looking contraptions were supposedly meant to keep zombies from clawing their way out. Or, well, that's what the legend says, anyway. The real reason was actually that people did it to protect their loved ones from body snatchers. In the 18th and 19th centuries, medical schools paid good money for fresh corpses, and resurrectionists weren't exactly shy about digging them up. So families fought back with iron bars and stone vaults, locking their loved ones down until they decomposed enough to be left alone. Then again, not every tomb was built out of fear. Some came from love, even if the result ended up being just as haunting. When 5-year-old Vivian May Allison died in 1899, her parents gave her the one thing she never got to enjoy in life: a dollhouse. She's buried in Connorsville City Cemetery inside a small white structure with glass windows and a collection of her favorite toys arranged neatly inside. Locals call it the little house that Heartache built, and well, you can see why. Visitors have been pressing their faces to the glass for over a century, glimpsing the tiny furniture, the worn dolls, and the grief frozen in time. Then there's Octavia Hatcher, whose final resting place in Pikeville, Kentucky, is rooted in horror. According to folklore, in 1891, after losing her infant son, Octavia fell into a coma and was pronounced dead. She was quickly buried, but just a few days later, other people with the same mysterious illness started waking up, and that's when her husband panicked. He had her exhumed, only to find the inside of her coffin shredded, her fingernails bloodied, and her face frozen in terror. Octavia had been buried alive. Her story spread, and so did the ghost stories. Visitors say you can still hear crying near her grave. Others talk about a woman with flowers who simply disappears every time she gets close to the stone. Down in Texas, Sandra Eileen West had no interest in a quiet farewell. When the wealthy socialite died in 1977 at just 37, her will laid out a very specific request. She wanted to be buried in her powder blue 1964 Ferrari, wearing her lace nightgown, of course. And she got her wish. In a widely publicized spectacle, the car was shipped to San Antonio, positioned with Sandra reclining behind the wheel, and sealed inside a massive plywood and concrete box. A crane dropped the whole setup into a 9-foot deep grave, and then workers poured concrete over it to keep out any looters. Today, there is nothing flashy at the site except a basic headstone. But somewhere under that plain patch of grass is a vintage Ferrari and its original owner parked for eternity. Which brings us to Maplewood Cemetery in Mayfield, where you'll find the Wooldridge monuments, a bizarre lineup of 18 life-size statues that locals call the Strange Procession, which never moves. Erected in the 1890s by Colonel Henry G. Wooldridge, the monument comes complete with stone versions of his mother, siblings, nieces, hunting dogs, a deer, a horse, and even 2 versions of himself, one standing in a frock coat, the other on horseback. Strangely, there's no statue of his father, which may or may not say something about the family politics. Be that as it may, the strange thing is that Wooldridge is the only one actually buried there. Everyone else? Just stone. Then again, in Liverpool, William MacKenzie's grave is marked by a 15-foot sandstone pyramid, which already feels out of place in a Victorian cemetery. But it's the story behind it that really sells it. MacKenzie was a known gambler, and according to folklore, he lost more than just money, he lost his soul in a card game. So to avoid being claimed by the devil after death, he supposedly left instructions that he not be buried underground. Instead, the tale goes, his body was placed sitting upright inside the pyramid, holding a winning hand of cards at a table forever mid-game. Now, whether that's the truth or not, that remains to be seen. According to church records, he was buried like everyone else, and the monument came a few years later. But people still visit, drawn to the idea that one man might have tried to bluff his way out of hell. Anyway, let's talk about the Caribbean tomb that kept rearranging itself. The Chase Vault in Christchurch Parish, Barbados, has been scaring people for over 200 years. The weirdness started in 1812 when the wealthy Chase family began using sealed vaults for burials. Every time someone new was added, the heavy lead coffins on the inside would be discovered differently from the last time the vault was closed. They were shoved upright, flipped over, or scattered around like someone had thrown a tantrum. The marble slab sealing the vault was always intact, and when officials tried to catch the culprit by spreading sand on the floor, not a single footprint showed up. After it happened again in 1816 and 1819, they gave up, removed the bodies, and abandoned the tomb altogether. Okay, so you remember Dr. Timothy Clark Smith, who had a window installed over his face just in case he woke up buried alive? Well, Martin A. Sheets, a wealthy businessman from Terre, Haute, thought a phone would be better. So when he died in 1926, he had his mausoleum outfitted with an actual telephone, a direct line from inside the crypt to the outside world. Oh, and just for good measure, he also asked for a bottle of whiskey to keep him company. The phone line's long since been disconnected, but things got even stranger when his wife Susan died a few years later. She was found collapsed at home, still holding the phone receiver. Coincidence? Maybe. I should also talk about the man who was so scared of decay that he had himself interred inside a boulder. In Oak Level, North Carolina, you'll find the massive stone tomb of William Jeffries, a 19th century state senator who died of fever at just 28. On his deathbed, gripped by hallucinations and a deep fear of being devoured by worms, he begged his family not to bury him in the earth. So they didn't. They hired stonemasons to hollow out a 20-foot boulder on their property and entombed him inside, sealing it with a marble slab. A boulder burial is probably not all that strange when you think about it, but it becomes bizarre when you read about the stories that surrounded it. People, for example, said that his body was stored in a barrel of brandy while the rock was being carved, and that his family drank it once the job was done. No clue if that part's true, but the tomb is still there today. Half a world away, you'll find a prophet's tomb that is still growing. According to legend, the mausoleum of Khoja Danyar in Samarkand, Uzbekistan holds the remains of the biblical prophet Daniel. The sarcophagus stretches nearly 60 feet, far too big for any normal human body. But that's kind of the point. Believers say Daniel's body continues to grow a little every year. If that were to be taken literally, Daniel would be much longer than 60 feet by now. However, historians tend to see the oversized tomb as a symbolic choice rather than a supernatural one. Timur, the 14th century conqueror who brought Daniel's relics to Samarkand, presumably had it built oversized, maybe to ward off grave robbers, maybe out of reverence. Either way, the myth stuck. And in France, one prince chose to skip the world of myth and legend entirely and confronted death head on. The tomb of René de Chalon, Prince of Orange, is unlike anything else from the medieval period. It sits inside Saint Etienne's church in Bar-le-Duc, and is a life-size sculpture that portrays him not as a noble figure lying in peace, but as a flayed skeletal corpse offering up his own heart. The statue, created by Ligier Richier in 1547, shows a gaunt body, strips of dried skin clinging to bone, one hand gripping his ribcage and the other raising a heart toward the heavens. Originally, it even held his real heart. It's part art, part warning. A reminder that death comes for us all, no matter our status. On a totally different note, the Toraja from the highlands of Sulawesi have some of the most striking funeral traditions in the world. Instead of the usual grave, they carve tombs directly into vertical cliffs and seal them with wooden panels. Guarding these cliffside tombs are tautau, carved wooden effigies of the deceased, dressed in real clothes and placed on balconies overlooking the village. During the elaborate funeral rituals, which can last several days and include feasts, chanting, and even buffalo sacrifices, it's believed the spirit inhabits the tautau to witness the ceremonies. Afterward, the effigy is placed high on the rock face alongside its ancestors, symbolically continuing to live among the family. In Peru, on the other hand, the dead don't watch from the balconies. They stare back from shallow tombs in the desert. At Chauchilla Cemetery near Nazca, dozens of pre-Inca mummies can be seen sitting in open-air pits, some dating back as far as the 2nd century CE. Thanks to the dry desert climate and ancient resin-soaked cotton wrappings, the mummies remain astonishingly well preserved. Many are still in a fetal position, draped in decaying textiles with long hair clinging to their skulls. Some even have skin after more than 1,200 years. Among the stranger finds, detached mummified heads with holes drilled into the skulls. Archaeologists once believed they were trophies of war, but now they think they were ritual offerings, and part of the same community as the intact bodies. Still, if you want a reminder that the moment of death can be peaceful, a tomb in Poblenou Cemetery, known as El Beso de la Muerte, the Kiss of Death, basically says it all. It was carved in a way that's both beautiful and disturbing, and tried to capture the exact moment of passing. A winged skeleton gently cradling the body of a young man, planting a kiss on his forehead as the man goes limp in its arms. The detail is powerful. Bony fingers press into soft flesh, and the contrast between the lifeless body and the figure of death is hard to look away from. Beneath it, a poetic inscription reads, "His young heart could not help beating. His blood stopped cold in his veins. He fell, feeling the kiss of death." Subtlety, however, wasn't exactly a priority in post-Soviet cemeteries. In parts of Russia and other former Soviet countries, you'll come across towering black granite tombstones etched with life-size portraits of men in slick suits, gold chains, and, in some cases, full-sized luxury cars. These are the graves of 90s mobsters and businessmen, and they make one thing clear: they did not go quietly. Some show laser-etched photos, others have full-on sculptures of the deceased mid-power pose. One grave in Novosibirsk even features a granite Mercedes, complete with the guy's tie flapping in the wind. Of course, over the top isn't the only way to get attention. There's a nearly abandoned cemetery in Illinois that marks the final resting place of Caroline Barnes, who died in the 1880s. What makes her tomb stand out is its very strange inscription. Died February 31st, 1882. As in, a day that doesn't exist. That alone kicked off local whispers that Caroline was a witch. The story goes that because she died on a day that never was, her spirit has no proper death date and can still walk free. Some say cameras malfunction around the grave or show strange distortions. Realistically, historians think it was probably just a stonecutter's error. But that hasn't stopped people from visiting the witch's grave. Moving on. In 1969, workers digging on an old plantation near Kruger, Mississippi, not far from Lexington, hit something unexpected just 3 feet down. It was a cast iron coffin with a glass viewing window, and inside was the lifelike body of a young woman in a red velvet dress. She became known as the Lady in Red, and thanks to the sealed environment, which turned out to be filled with an alcohol mixture, her body was remarkably intact. Straight auburn hair, flawless skin, perfect teeth, but no name. After her reburial in Lexington's Odd Fellows Cemetery, her gravestone listed her estimated birth year as 1835, and the year she was found as her date of death, 1969. Historians think she may have died of yellow fever and was preserved for transport, but despite all the theories, her true identity and the circumstances surrounding her burial remain a mystery. Alright, let's move from mystery to devotion. In northern Japan, some of the strangest tombs you'll ever see aren't graves at all. They're temples. Inside, you'll find the preserved bodies of Buddhist monks who mummified themselves in the pursuit of enlightenment. These Sokushinbutsu spent years slowly preparing for death through fasting, meditation, and isolation, drying out their bodies until they were finally sealed inside a chamber, alive, in the lotus position. A bell let others know that they were still conscious. When the bell stopped, well, the tomb was closed for good. The practice was eventually banned, but the monks who achieved it remain enshrined, quite literally, in tombs built to honor the living. There's also the famous one in Utah that's been creeping people out for decades. Lily E. Gray, born 1881, died 1958, was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery, and her headstone looks pretty standard. Until you get to the last line, victim of the beast 666. That single phrase turned her grave into a tourist hotspot. As you can imagine, people started speculating about satanic cults and demonic rituals. But after years of rumors, researchers eventually landed on a more grounded explanation. The wording likely came from her husband, Elmer Gray. He was known for paranoid rants and reportedly blamed the government, which he apparently referred to as the beast for Lily's death. At number 2 on our list today, we've got a grave that's even weirder, because it might not belong to a human at all. Back in 1897, decades before Roswell, the town of Aurora, Texas, made headlines with a strange story about a UFO crash. According to newspaper reports, an airship slammed into a windmill and exploded, killing its tiny otherworldly pilot. The townspeople, unsure of what else to do, buried the body in the local cemetery and gave it a proper Christian burial, complete with a headstone featuring what looked like a flying saucer. The marker vanished in the 70s, but believers still show up with trinkets and offerings, leaving them at this supposed site under a tree. Whether it was a hoax, hoedown, or honest-to-God alien encounter, well, we'll probably never know. But the Aurora gravesite remains one of the strangest tombs in Texas, if not the galaxy. Finally, we've got a tomb that moves, and nobody knows why. The grave of Charles Merchant in Marion, Ohio, is marked by a 5,200-pound granite sphere. It's called the Merchant Ball, and when it was installed in 1896, one spot on the bottom was left rough and unpolished. A few years later, people noticed something strange. That rough patch had moved. The ball had started to turn. His family tried to stop it, even resealed and tarred the thing in 1898, but it kept rotating. Scientists looked into it and suggested everything from temperature swings to seismic vibrations. Some locals think it might be ghosts. Whatever the reason, it's still slowly rolling. Not fast enough for anyone to actually see it happen, but enough that the proof is right there. A once hidden patch now staring up at the sky. And that's a wrap. You got a favorite? Or did I miss one? Maybe a tomb you definitely want to visit in person? Drop it in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. And if you're not quite ready to say goodbye, well, check out our related video, 25 of the worst places in history to time travel to. Fair warning though, it's a dark one. As always, thank you for watching. Hit that bell, subscribe, and I'll catch you again next time. Bye.